I've always believed that living out here on my land was supposed to mean peace and quiet. Wide open skies, the smell of fresh grass in the morning, the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Simple things that make life worth living. I've worked hard for this little piece of property, and I take a lot of pride in it. My barn might not be fancy, but it's sturdy. My tractor might be old, but it runs like a beast. Out here, everything has a purpose, and that's how I like it. No fuss, no drama, no one telling me how to live my life. At least that's how it used to be. The problem started when the Homeowners Association decided to stick their noses where they didn't belong. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand why HOAs exist. They want neat lawns, matching fences, everybody following the same little rule book so the neighborhood looks picture perfect. But here's the thing. What looks perfect to them doesn't always make sense in real life. Out here, barns aren't painted like designer homes. Chickens don't walk in straight lines. Tractors aren't quiet little machines you keep hidden in a garage. But try explaining that to the folks running the HOA, and then there's Karen. Every neighborhood has one, but ours hit the jackpot. She's the self-appointed queen bee of the HOA, the kind of woman who acts like she owns every square foot of land around here, even if it's not hers. She drives around in her luxury cars, always with a phone in her hand, snapping pictures of people's lawns, fences, and driveways like she's running some kind of neighborhood surveillance program. Most folks keep their heads down and try to avoid crossing her, but I've never been the type to bow to anyone. From the very start, Karen made it clear she didn't like me or my property. She complained that my barn was an eyesore, that the faded red paint didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic. She complained that my tractor was too loud in the mornings when I fired it up to get work done. She even complained about my chickens wandering too close to the road, as if free-ranging hens were some sort of public danger. Every month, it seemed like another letter from the HOA would show up in my mailbox, always signed off with Karen's name at the bottom. At first, I tried to laugh it off. People like her live in their own little world, and I figured as long as I kept to myself, she'd eventually find someone else to harass. But it didn't stop. The more she complained, the more personal it started to feel. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about control. And that's the thing about people like Karen. Once they sense they can push you around, they don't stop. They keep pushing. But here's the funny part. No matter how many complaints she sent in, no matter how many threats of fines or violations she tried to throw my way, this was still my land. This barn, this tractor, these chickens, they're mine. I built this life with my own two hands, and I wasn't about to let some neighbor with a fancy car and too much free time tell me how to live it. Still, there was always tension. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel her eyes on me from across the street, like she was just waiting for me to slip up. Every time I heard her car pull up, I knew she was probably coming back from another HOA meeting where my name was the topic of conversation. It was a constant game of cat and mouse, her trying to impose her rules, me ignoring them as best I could. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before she did something that went too far, something that crossed the line from annoyance to outright war. That morning started out just like any other. The sun was coming up over the fields, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had that crisp bite you only get early in the day. I poured myself a strong cup of coffee, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside with the kind of mindset you have when you know it's going to be a long but satisfying day of work. My barn is the heart of my property. It's where I keep my tools, feed, and everything I need to keep things running smoothly. Without access to it, the whole rhythm of my day falls apart. So when I rounded the corner and saw what was sitting right across my barn doors, I couldn't believe my eyes. There it was, a gleaming jet-black Bentley, parked so close against the doors that I couldn't even slide them open an inch. The thing looked like it had just rolled out of a showroom, polished to perfection, reflecting the morning sun like a mirror. And the placement wasn't an accident. No one just happens to park a $200,000 car flush against someone's barn doors. This was deliberate. This was a message. At first, I just stood there staring, coffee cup halfway to my lips, trying to process the absurdity of what I was looking at. Of all the places in the world to park a car, she chose here, my barn, my door, the one place I absolutely needed to get into. It wasn't just inconvenient, it was infuriating. Out here, barns aren't decorations. They're not just big red buildings you pose in front of for Instagram pictures. They're functional, they're essential. And when you block one, you're not just being rude, you're stopping a man from doing his work. I walked up to the car, almost expecting to find some kind of note on the windshield. Maybe even a warning from the HOA about violations or aesthetic standards. But there was nothing. Just that shiny hood ornament staring back at me like it owned the place. The closer I looked, the angrier I got. It wasn't even parked straight, just angled across the doors like she wanted to make sure there was absolutely no way I could slide them open. It was the kind of petty move that doesn't come from misunderstanding. It comes from someone who wants to get under your skin. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Maybe, just maybe, this was a mistake. Maybe she'd had visitors and they parked here without knowing. Maybe her car broke down and she had to leave it there. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, because that's what decent folks do. But deep down, I knew better. Karen doesn't make mistakes like this. She makes statements. And sure enough, when I looked across the road, there she was, standing on her porch, arms folded, watching me like a hawk. The smirk on her face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an accident. This was her way of saying, you don't control what happens here. I do. In that moment, I felt a mix of emotions. Frustration, disbelief, even a little amusement at just how far she was willing to go. But underneath all that was a slow-burning anger. I rely on that barn every single day. It's where my tractor is, where my supplies are, where I keep everything that keeps this land running. Blocking it wasn't just disrespectful, it was sabotage. She knew exactly what she was doing. I stood there a little longer, coffee turning cold in my hand, and realized I was at a crossroads. I could walk over there, knock on her door, and try to reason with her again. Or I could see this for what it really was. The beginning of a battle she thought she could win. Either way, one thing was clear. She had crossed a line that morning, and there was no going back. I figured the best thing to do was to try the polite route first. I'm not the kind of man who looks for a fight if it can be avoided. And truth be told, I still wanted to believe there was a chance this could be chalked up to some misunderstanding. So I set my coffee cup down, brushed the dust off my jeans, and made the short walk across the street to Karen's front door. Even before I knocked, I could feel her presence. The curtains twitched, the sound of her little designer dog yapping from inside, and then the door swung open like she'd been waiting for me. I put on the calmest voice I could manage and said, "Morning, Karen. Looks like your car's blocking my barn. Any chance you could move it so I can get started on my work?" Her response was exactly the kind of thing you'd expect from someone who thrives on control. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look embarrassed. She just leaned against the door frame, folded her arms, and gave me that smug half-smile she always seemed to wear when she thought she was winning. "Oh," she said, dragging out the word like she'd just remembered something trivial. "You mean the barn that ruins the view from my front porch?" I took a breath, steadying myself, and nodded. "The same barn that's been there for decades. The one I use every day. That's the one." Instead of acknowledging the problem, she tilted her head, pretending to think it over. Then she said, "You know, maybe if you had a proper garage like everyone else instead of that ugly old thing, this wouldn't be an issue. Some of us don't enjoy staring at rust and peeling paint every morning." That was the moment I realized she wasn't just being difficult, she was being intentional. She wasn't going to move that car because the whole point was to block me. To her, this wasn't about parking. It was about teaching me a lesson, about putting me in my place. I kept my voice steady. "Karen, all I'm asking is for you to move your car so I can open my barn doors. I don't care what you think of it, but blocking it isn't going to change anything." She laughed then, a short, sharp laugh that made my blood boil. "Maybe it will. Maybe you'll finally realize that this is a neighborhood, not a farmyard. We have standards here. Some of us care about appearances. It was like talking to a brick wall. Reason wasn't going to work because she wasn't interested in reason. She was interested in power. Every word out of her mouth was dripping with condescension, as if my way of life didn't count because it didn't fit her idea of perfect. I stood there for a long second, biting my tongue, staring past her at the chandelier glittering in her entryway, the marble floor, the carefully staged furniture that looked more like a magazine spread than a home. Everything about her screamed control and image. Everything about me, my barn, my tractor, My land was the opposite. And in her mind, that made me the enemy. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm but firm. "I'll give you another chance to do the right thing. Move your car, Karen." Her smile widened, and she shook her head slowly. "No, I don't think I will. Maybe this will motivate you to do some renovations." Then, without another word, she stepped back inside and shut the door in my face. I stood there staring at the closed door, the echo of that smug tone still ringing in my ears, and felt the shift inside me. I had come over here hoping for cooperation, maybe even a shred of decency. What I got instead was mockery and defiance. She had made her position clear. She wasn't going to stop until she broke me down or drove me out. But what she didn't realize was that I've never been the type to back down, especially not on my own land. When her door clicked shut in my face, I just stood there for a moment, letting the silence sink in. The polite approach had failed, and it wasn't because I hadn't tried hard enough. It was because she never intended to listen. Karen wanted a reaction. She wanted me to lose my temper, beg her, or cave under the pressure of her smug little games. But instead of anger boiling over, I felt a kind of clarity wash over me. If words weren't going to solve this, then it was time for action. And when you live on the land, action usually involves horsepower, real horsepower. I turned back toward my barn, the sight of that shiny Bentley still wedged up against the doors like some kind of barricade. It looked ridiculous, out of place, like a trophy sitting in the wrong arena. Bentleys belong on manicured driveways and city streets, not leaning up against a farmer's barn. The more I looked at it, the more it felt like an insult, not just to me, but to the life I'd built here. And if that's the game she wanted to play, I had the perfect answer parked right behind those doors. Of course, the irony wasn't lost on me. She was trying to keep me out of my barn. And in doing so, she was daring me to use the very thing she hated most, my tractor. That old beast had been with me through more seasons than I could count. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't quiet, and it sure as hell wasn't pretty. But it was strong, reliable, and unapologetically loud. Everything Karen despised. I walked around the side of the barn where I keep a smaller door just for me. Slipped in, and there it was, my workhorse, sitting in the dim light, smelling of diesel and dirt. I ran my hand along the metal, almost like I was greeting an old friend, and muttered, "Looks like we've got a job to do." Sliding into the seat, I turned the key, and that familiar roar filled the air. The ground beneath me trembled as the engine came to life, coughing once before settling into its deep growl. It was music to my ears, but I knew it was the exact kind of sound that would make Karen grind her teeth from across the street. I eased it forward, the tires crunching gravel, the barn creaking as I opened the side gate wide enough to roll out. The morning was quiet except for the low rumble of my machine, and as I steered it toward the front of the barn, I caught sight of Karen stepping back onto her porch. She had that same smug expression, but this time I saw something else too, a flicker of uncertainty. Maybe she thought I wouldn't dare. Maybe she thought the sight of her shiny new Bentley would intimidate me. But she had underestimated one very important thing. Out here, a tractor isn't just a vehicle. It's a statement. I lined it up slow, careful, steady. The Bentley gleamed in front of me, polished and perfect, almost daring me to make the first move. My hands tightened on the wheel, my foot hovering over the pedal. There was no hesitation in me anymore. The way I saw it, she had crossed into my world, onto my land, and tried to stop me from doing the one thing I do every day: work. And when you stop a man from his work, you might as well be spitting in his face. The tractor roared louder as I pressed down, inch by inch closing the distance. Karen's expression changed, smugness giving way to shock. She shouted something I couldn't hear over the engine, waving her hands frantically now. But it was too late. She wanted to play games with my livelihood, and I wasn't about to let her win. That was the turning point. No more letters, no more back-and-forth arguments, no more pretending this was about aesthetic standards. This was about respect. And she was about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with someone who doesn't back down. The tractor lurched forward, steady and unstoppable, and the moment that heavy front metal met the Bentley's polished bumper, it was like watching two worlds collide. Her perfect little luxury bubble against the raw, unpolished strength of a machine built for work. The crunch of metal and shattering glass filled the air, echoing across the quiet morning like a gunshot. I didn't slam into it, I wasn't reckless. I pushed, slow and deliberate, letting the weight of the tractor do the talking. The Bentley groaned under the pressure, tires squealing as it was shoved back from the barn doors like a toy car caught under a boot. Karen's scream pierced the air. She was shrieking from her porch, hands in her hair, her little designer dog barking like it understood the gravity of the moment. She ran a few steps forward, then stopped short at the edge of her manicured lawn, too horrified to come closer. "You're insane!" she yelled, her voice cracking with panic. "Do you know how much that car costs?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The tractor's growl and the scraping metal said everything for me. With one steady push, I cleared the doors enough to swing them open wide. The Bentley now sat at an awkward angle. Its side panels caved in. Windshield cracked like a spiderweb. The once flawless symbol of her status now looked like nothing more than a broken shell. I parked the tractor, killed the engine, and stepped down onto the gravel, wiping my hands on my jeans as if I'd just finished a routine chore. To me, that's exactly what it was, a chore. An obstacle in the way of my work. Removed the only way it could be. Karen stormed closer now, her face flushed red, finger pointing at me like she thought she could command me with sheer volume. "I'll sue you. You'll pay for every cent of this. I'll have the HOA fine you until you're bankrupt. Do you hear me? You're finished." Her words tumbled out in a frenzy, but the thing is, fear was laced between the rage. She hadn't expected me to call her bluff. She thought her money, her car, and her position on the HOA board gave her the power to bully me. What she hadn't factored in was that I don't scare easy. And I sure as hell don't bow down to threats. I let her rant. Just standing there with my arms crossed, the faint smell of diesel still hanging in the air. Neighbors started to peek out from their porches and windows, drawn by the sound of destruction and her shrieking. And here's the part that made me smile, even if just a little. Most of them weren't looking at me with anger. They were looking at me with quiet satisfaction. Because Karen had been a thorn in everyone's side, not just mine. I could see it in their faces, the relief of finally seeing someone stand up to her. She kept screaming, but the more she did, the more ridiculous she looked. Her perfect hair out of place, her voice cracking, her precious car ruined while she stood helpless. And me? I just walked past her, opened the barn doors wide, and fired the tractor up again to roll inside and get on with my day. Business as usual. The HOA tried to make noise about it later, of course. Letters, threats, all the usual nonsense. But the story had already spread, and not in the way Karen hoped. Word around the neighborhood was simple. She picked a fight and lost. And no matter how many fines or complaints she filed, she couldn't erase the image burned into everyone's mind. The queen bee of the HOA being humbled by a tractor. Looking back, it wasn't just about the car. It was about the principle. This was my land, my barn, my way of life. And if someone thought they could take that from me with intimidation and status symbols, they were dead wrong. Out here, respect isn't bought with money or flashy cars. It's earned. And sometimes, when push comes to shove, it's enforced by the rumble of an old tractor and a man who refuses to back down. When I shut the barn doors that night, the sun setting behind me, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. Karen could scream, she could threaten, she could plot her next move. But in that moment, everyone knew the truth. On my land, my rules stand. And no Bentley, no HOA, and no so-called Karen was ever going to change that.